Hi guys, welcome back. Hey, 500 subscribers! You guys are awesome! I'll try to deserve this. Today we're going to finish with drop voicings, discuss the minor ninth avoidance rule, consonance and dissonance, suspended chords, add chords, 6/9 chords, an introduction to extensions, and some confusing notation conventions. Let's do it! Before we begin, I'd like to point out that when creating drop voicings, the best results will be obtained when they are derived from the tightest closed position voicings for triads or seventh chords. This means that all voices, including the bass voice, should be within the range of 1 octave. In other words, in regards to drop voicings, ignore the one exception to the rule in the last episode which states that you should look at the distance between the soprano and tenor voices only and ignore the bass voice to determine whether it's in closed position. For the best sounding drop voicings, all voices, including the bass voice in closed position, should be within the range of 1 octave. As I discussed in Music Mechanics 18, ninths, 11ths, and 13ths are compound intervals. Minor ninths in particular are harsh sounding compound intervals and are usually avoided when constructing chords. To illustrate this, let's revisit 2 chords from the last episode that I mentioned sounded harsh. Notice the minor ninth intervals in both of these chords. Listen to how the minor ninth sounds in each chord if I emphasize the 2 notes that form the interval. Here's the minor ninth from the first chord. And here's the minor ninth from the second chord. Because of this minor ninth harshness, voicings that include minor ninths are usually avoided. In musical terms, this interval is referred to as being dissonant. Dissonance is defined as anything that is harsh sounding or not pleasing to the ear. Conversely, anything that sounds pleasing to the ear is described as being consonant. For example, intervals such as a minor second or an augmented fourth are considered dissonant, while a perfect fifth or a perfect octave are examples of consonants. Consonant sounds can further be described as feeling stable, while dissonant sounds seem unstable and feel like they need to resolve. Consonance and dissonance are relative terms, and even though a more or less general consensus exists regarding these concepts, personal taste comes into account too. For example, something that sounds great to one person might sound completely disagreeable to another. Additionally, consonance and dissonance can be contextual. Time period and genre, for example, may affect the perceived consonance or dissonance. For example, chords used in the Romantic era of symphonic music might sound dissonant in the Baroque era. Similarly, jazz chords used in pop songs might also sound dissonant. Because dissonance creates a feeling of being unresolved while consonance creates a feeling of stability, consonance and dissonance often counterbalance each other. Too much consonance can make music sound boring, while too much dissonance can be unpleasant to listen to. Regarding the minor ninth avoidance rule specifically, there are some exceptions, and we'll cover this rule in more detail when we get to extensions in a later episode. A suspended chord is a chord whose third has been removed and replaced with either a second or a fourth. These chords are denoted with the shorthand sus. If the third was replaced by a second, it is called a sus2 chord. If it is replaced by a fourth, it's called a sus4 chord. Take a look at these examples. Sus2 chords employ a major second above the root along with the root and fifth, while sus4 chords employ a perfect fourth above the root along with the root and fifth. Add chords or added note chords, added tone chords are different from sus chords in that the third is still present in the chord and another note is added to the chord. For example, a C add 2 chord has the entire major triad, root, third, and fifth, along with an added major second. Observe the differences between a C add 2 and a C sus 2 in this example. While it's possible to add any note to a chord, the most common types are the add 2 and add 6 chords, employing a major second and a major sixth above the root respectively, as in these examples. Observe that the chord with the 6 added is notated as a C6 rather than a C add 6. While it's possible to write an add 6 chord as C add 6, the most common way of notating this chord is with the shorthand notation C6. Add 6 chords are typically used in older styles of music, especially jazz. They are also used as a kind of replacement for a major 7th chord when the melody note of a song is a half step away from the major 7th chord factor. This is done so the melody note does not clash with the major 7th in the major 7th chord, which is only a half step away, causing some confusion in the listener as to which note is the melody note. Notice how much more clearly you can hear the melody note, the high C, when the chord below it is a C6 rather than a C major 7th. The major 7th in the C major 7th chord makes it more difficult to distinguish which note is the melody, the high C or the B. It makes for a more cluttered sound, which can, of course, be alleviated by substituting a C6 for the C major 7th, creating more distance between the chord factors in the melody. A minor add 6 chord is also possible and is notated with any of the minor triad notation symbols along with the number 6. This chord still adds a major 6 above the root. A 7th is never an added note to a triad since it would simply turn the triad into a 7th chord and it would use 7th chord notation. However, notes higher than a 7th, called extensions, can be added to a triad, resulting in add 9, add 11, and add 13ths. These chords have a major 9th, perfect 11th, and major 13th above the root respectively. Some confusion exists about the notation of add chords. For instance, take a look at the differences between these examples. Note the chords on the left in each example are simply triads with a major 9th above the root, while the chords on the right are 7th chords with an added 9th. Although you might think they would be the same chord, they are actually different because of how they're notated with chord symbols. To understand the difference, remove the add 9 from both examples. What you are left with, according to the notation, is a C major triad and a C minor triad. The chords on the right, however, are 7th chords, not triads, with an added extension of a 9th since the word add is not present. They use a different notation convention that is similar to 7th chord notation. For example, a C major 7th or a C minor 7th would be notated as C capital M7 or C lowercase m7 respectively. 7th chords with added extensions such as a 9th often replace the number 7, which identifies it as a 7th chord, with the number of the extension, in this case a 9th, and the notation rules assume that the 7th is taken for granted. You could also notate these chords as C capital M7 add 9 and C lowercase m7 add 9, but it is more common practice to use this shorthand notation to denote these chords which again assume a 7th is already present. Simply put, whenever there is an add X, get rid of the add X and identify the kind of chord it is, then just add X to it. Another chord in common use is the 6-9 chord. In a strict sense, the notes of the 6-9 chord contain the root, major 3rd, perfect 5th, major 6th, and major 9th. However, this chord is often voiced with an omitted 5th as shown in the second bar. This particular voicing is very popular and contains a major 3rd above the root, E, a major 6th above the root, A, and a major 9th above the root, D. Notice in this example that the E and A are separated by an interval of a perfect 4th, and the A and D are separated by an interval of a perfect 4th. This is the most common voicing for this type of chord, is often used as a substitute for a major 7th or a major 9th chord, and it creates an interesting sound since all of the notes except for the root are separated by a perfect 4th. Let's hear how this sounds. One additional convention that confuses people is sus9 or 9 sus notation. For example, a C sus9 might be interpreted as having a root, 5th, and 9th as shown here. In jazz or popular music, this interpretation would be wrong. In this particular instance, a C sus9 or a C9 sus is interpreted as a dominant 7th chord with a sus4 and a 9th added as shown here. My personal opinion? This shorthand is lazy and should probably not be used since it can cause confusion and may result in a musician misinterpreting the notation and playing a different chord than you had in mind. To avoid confusion, I would notate this chord as a C9 sus4 or a C7 sus4 add 9. As far as I can tell, the origin of the shorthand notation for this chord probably comes from the different notation conventions for 7th chords with extensions previously discussed. To illustrate this, let's look at an ordinary C dominant 7th chord. As we know, the chord symbol for a dominant seventh is just a letter, C, and a number 7 with nothing in between. If we add a ninth to this chord, we can use the different notation conventions for seventh chords with extensions we mentioned in this episode to write C9, where the 7 would be replaced with a 9 and the seventh is assumed. Since a sus4 is the most common type of suspension, in this specific type of notation, when the word sus is added, it's assumed that the fourth is suspended. So, C9 sus can be interpreted as a dominant seventh chord add 9, where the seventh is assumed, and a suspended fourth, where the fourth is the assumed suspension. As far as the other way of notating this chord, C sus 9, your guess is as good as mine as to why it exists. It seems confusing. As I said before, I always write this chord as C9 sus 4 to avoid confusion. Notice that this chord can also be notated as a slash chord. It can be written as G minor 7 over C. G minor 7 is simply in third inversion. Another common way of voicing this chord is by omitting the fifth. This results in a major triad built a minor seventh up from the root. In our example here, removing the fifth results in a second inversion B-flat major triad over C and can also be notated as a slash chord, namely B-flat over C. Listen to the difference in the way these two chords sound. You will also see chords with other compound intervals such as 11ths and 13ths following the same unusual shorthand conventions as the ninths. For example, you may see a dominant 7th sus4 with an added 13th written as C sus 13 or C13 sus. What if you just wanted to write a triad with a sus4 and added 9th? Start out by dealing with the triad first, then suspend the 4th, and finally add the 9th. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like and leave a comment below if you have any questions. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you like the music you've been listening to, please be sure to check out my good friend David Anderson's album, This Is My Real Job, at this link.